Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the first ever GFFN Euro Show. I'm your host, Nathan Staples, and for the next 6 weeks, myself and an assortment of guests will guide you through what promises to be another exciting edition of the European Championships. Joining me this evening are French football journalist Jonathan Johnson and our very own Eric Devine. Welcome to you all. We start the show with the hosts and current bookies' favourites, France, who haven't had everything go their way ahead of this tournament. From defensive failures on the field to crazy accusations off it, there's been no shortage of column inches devoted to Didier Deschamps' men. But Jonathan, how do you think Les Bleus' the preparations have been heading into the tournament?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the situation with Benzema has not been ideal. Losing a couple of players to injury as well. The likes of Rafael Varane, Jeremy Mathieu. That's also not been the sort of thing that Deschamps would have wanted. But otherwise, I think their preparations have gone relatively well. The team have performed reasonably well against Cameroon and Scotland. So I think that they're approaching the Romania match on a high, which obviously is very important for the hosts. But I do worry, how much of an issue the Benzema scandal has caused, and what that's done to the players' mentality going into this opening week.
Yeah, it's been a strange moment, really, Eric, with Benzema coming out with those comments just before the finals have started. He accused Deschamps' choices of being racist. What were your thoughts on his words?
I mean, it obviously sounds a bit like sour grapes coming from Benzema. I think that this is a player who I think over the years has been really maligned for his performances with the international team. For as superb as he's been for Real Madrid, he's never, really delivered on the promises he showed for his club to lead this team to any significant success at the international stage. And I think that, at someone who's 29 this year, he's starting to begin to run out of chances to really show that he can be a player upon which France can hang his hat. I mean, and now we're beginning to see the likes of Antoine Griezmann and Paul Pogba sort of surpass him as being players that are thought of as being the primary players for France. And I think that there's probably a decent level of that motivation and that guiding his thinking. So I think that's probably what's going on in his head. But it seems that he may have, or at least for as long as Deschamps is still in charge, really destroyed his chances of eventually being recalled to the team. Because what if any purpose does this serve besides to have a negative influence? I mean, we've seen with the likes of Samir Nasri, for example, how destructive comments can really be the end of a player's international career, no matter how successful they are with their club. And I think that Benzema may be very close to, if he hasn't already, putting himself in a similar position as Nasri to just never be recalled for France again, because he's being willfully destructive towards the potential harmony that the squad have developed. Especially having having had two regulars no longer be in the team as a result of this.
Yeah, and especially after the problems in previous tournaments, we think back to the World Cups in 2010 and recent tournaments where they've not seemed as harmonious, and then the team seems to pull together, and then one more spanner is thrown into the works. But back onto things on the field and the recent friendlies, we'll start with that one against Cameroon, Jonathan. It was an okay performance with a good couple of goals, but again, there's worries in defence again, isn't there?
Yeah, hugely. I mean, missing Rafael Varane is a big problem for France going into the tournament. I'm not convinced by Adil Rami. To be perfectly honest with you, I'm not entirely sold on Laurent Koscielny either. But there's no real choice now. He is the senior starting central defender, and for me, I think Deschamps is going into this tournament with only really 50% of his ideal starting centre-back pairing. And it looked that way on the pitch against Cameroon. Rami and Koscielny looked every bit the partnership that hasn't played at international level together, or club level, of course, since 2012. And I still think they looked a bit rusty against Scotland, although they didn't have to, really excel in that game. So I think it'll be interesting if Romania can create a few chances in the opening match to see just how the defence deals with that, because I think that as the further France go in this tournament, I think that the central defensive partnership of Rami and Koscielny will come under more pressure, more scrutiny. And at the moment, I fear that is the one area that the bigger sides in this tournament will be able to exploit later on, and potentially knock France out.
Yeah, it is a real worry, and the fact that Deschamps is sticking with this slightly dated idea of using a left-footed centre-back, that's why he seems to be using Adil Rami instead of someone like you may pick, Eric, Samuel Umtiti. Is that a sensible decision to play someone who's played so little international football in the last few years?
I understand why. I understand his logic, but if that's what he wants to do, why not bring in Loic Perrin, someone who's been included in the squad and who's also a different type of player? I mean, all of France's center backs are, if we think about it, really of a piece. Whether it's Koscielny, whether it's Sakho, whether it's Varane, even Umtiti to some degree, are players who are very much more willing to use their pace to make up for potential positioning miscues. I mean, Varane in particular, we rave about his wonderful pace and acceleration for a center back, but oftentimes that's because he's made a mistake, and we get to see that come into play. Kurt Zouma, I think had he been included, he probably would have, had he not been injured, probably would have started ahead of Rami. But I think the fact of the matter is that it does make sense to have a player like Rami who's a bit more willing to be positionally sound and more slow-footed. But that being said, I just wouldn't have gone with Rami. I think that it really smacks of desperation. And again, Perrin has been incredibly solid for Saint-Etienne for years and years and years. I know he's a little bit older now. He's, I believe, 31 this year. But the fact of the matter is, I think that his assuredness and positional sense would allow France to have a more cohesive defense. No matter who his partner is, whether it's Koscielny or Umtiti or whoever else will play on the left side of central defense.
And I think for me, the most important thing in Deschamps' mind when he made these decisions is the experience of these players. I think the thing that counts against Umtiti and it counts against Perrin as well, which is crazy to say for somebody who's been around for so long, and is a real familiar face for us in Ligue 1, is that Rami has more experience at international level and crucially in big international tournaments than both Umtiti and Perrin. So I think that I can see that being quite a logical move from Deschamps as well. But I think there would be big question marks over the centre back pairing, whether it was Umtiti Koscielny, Perrin Koscielny, or even Mangala Koscielny as well. I think there's question marks over all of those central defenders in the squad at the moment. And we mentioned Zouma, mentioned Varane, mentioned Sakho. All three of those players would have been ahead of the likes of Rami and even ahead of the likes of Umtiti as well, had they been either fit or not looking at a big suspension from UEFA as Sakho was at the time.
Yeah, and that's really where the issues lie for France at this moment in time. But there is certainly some positives, and we saw that in that game against Scotland a few days ago, Jonathan. They really put on an excellent display, especially in the first half, and it gives them some real hope for the future of this tournament, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one big positive from that game was the way Giroud looked so sharp in front of goal, because that's been one of the big concerns ahead of the tournament. But certainly ahead of these two warm-up games, there was a lot of criticism of Giroud, so much of it unwarranted. I know that he has his detractors when he plays for Arsenal, and he can be a frustrating player to watch at times. But at the same time, when he plays for France, he gives everything. And I don't think he's ever really let Deschamps down when he's played. I don't think he's had poor performances to the degree that we've seen from with Arsenal from time to time. So I think all of this this criticism of Giroud is ridiculous, and I don't particularly understand where it's come from. Aside from the fact that there are a lot of staunch supporters of Karim Benzema who refuse to wake up to reality and look at the way that he plays with the national team, and his stats at international level, because Giroud, statistically speaking, is he's not far off Benzema, and I think he deserves the chance to to lead the line. I'm not saying that France are better off without Benzema, because to have a player of that ability in the squad is obviously going to be a big boost. But to be without the distraction of Benzema, or in theory without the distraction of Benzema, this summer, I think was a good thing for France. But now, of course, because of what's happened with Benzema's comments, it's kind of brought that controversy back to France's door, and it's something that Deschamps is trying to minimise as much as he can, so that he can keep the players focused on the opening game. And we saw against Scotland, just how focused the players do look. I mean, okay, second half was a bit of a stroll, but all the work was done in the first half, and it was a very encouraging opening 45 minutes. France looked sharp in front of goal, didn't get tested too much defensively, and like I said, they still looked a bit ropey at times when the ball did get into their half. However, I think it was as good a warm-up as they could have hoped for, the French, going into the game against Romania. And I think that as long as Giroud is feeling the same level of confidence that he is at the moment, then I think it's going to be possible for this France team to score a lot of goals in the tournament.
Yeah, and he's in really good form in France at the moment. He scored quite a few goals in the last couple of friendlies for his national side. And Eric, those attacking options really looked at full strength against Scotland, didn't they? They looked dangerous almost every time they moved forward, especially in that first half.
Yeah, I have to agree with Jonathan. I honestly had been one of Giroud's detractors earlier in the season when I had been writing my Les Bleus watch for the site. We had a piece that was published every week, 5 players who helped and hindered their performances towards being selected for this summer squad, and Giroud was frequently on the underperforming squad due to that long goalless run he'd had with Arsenal. But seeing him in action has really assuaged my doubts. I think that prior to his showing his good form for Les Bleus, I would have preferred that Deschamps would have gone with either Griezmann or Martial up top. But we've seen how both of them can be potent scorers playing in a 4-3-3. Martial in particular when he was at Monaco. But the fact of the matter is that Giroud looks ready. He looks hungry. His one-touch play is stupendous, and he's ready to be an active physical player when needs be, and his touch is improving as well. I think that much to my pleasant surprise, I am a lot higher on France, having seen them play going forward in these 2 friendlies, than I was a couple weeks ago. I think that they really look a team now, and they really look dangerous. And again, Scotland and Cameroon aren't the best opposition, and I do worry about their defensive frailties. But going forward, I mean, the front 6 players, if you will, for France are, I would argue, the best in the tournament, and this team's just coming together at the right time.
Yeah, and just some selection questions to throw at you just for the end of this sort of conversation. And Jonathan, I'm going to go with probably a quite debated one in France at least. Would it be Payet or would it be Martial for you on that left-hand side with Griezmann and I'm assuming Giroud up front as well?
For me, it has to be Payet at the moment. I think that he is in such good form. What he's shown for France in the last few games. I don't see how Deschamps can start against Romania without him in the team. I mean, you've also got to factor in the fact that he is such a threat from set pieces and from range as well. It doesn't have to be a dead ball. He has a great shot on him from distance, and when you have a player who's in that sort of run of form that he's in at the moment and has been for West Ham throughout the season. I think that he has to be started there. I mean, okay, we saw in the game against Cameroon, he lacks a little bit defensively every now and then, but I think that as good as Martial is, I still prefer him through the middle as opposed to out wide, and I'd prefer to see him sort of as one of the options to bring off the bench, as opposed to starting wide on the left when you've got Payet in this sort of form. And if Payet sort of starts to be looking a bit disinterested again like he has done in the past for France, then Deschamps can of course rethink it at that moment. But for me at the moment, I think that it has to be Payet in that front 3 with Griezmann and Giroud. And I think I would really like to see Griezmann get a chance in the middle in the same way that we see him for Atletico. I mean, I'm kind of torn because I think it would be a really poor move of Deschamps if France were to win their two opening matches to completely change things, because I think it's one of the things that really undermined them at the World Cup back in 2014. But I would really like to see what a front three, that consists of Griezmann, Martial, and Coman could actually do in a game. But I think to go into the Switzerland match with an experimental front three like that might be a bit of a risk, even if France have won the two games before that. But there is so much potential. So many options for Deschamps to go through, but I do think that the right decision, certainly ahead of the Romania game, will be to start Payet on the left, Griezmann on the right, with Giroud in the middle.
Yeah, that front line of Martial, Griezmann, and Coman gives me nightmares. Never mind our position defences. Eric, a position we've been debating quite a bit this season is that third man in midfield, and with Lassana Diarra out as well, is it Kante or is it Cabaye for you?
I think it has to be Kante. I think that the work rate and energy of the trio of Kante, Pogba, and Matuidi is frankly frightening. I appreciate Cabaye's qualities, and I think that he worked well at the base of midfield in the World Cup. But I just again, with the defensive situation being what it is, France need to protect their back four. And for me, N'Golo Kante is the best option there. I think that his defensive instincts and his tackling ability, and also his ability to start counterattacks with the way he breaks up play, make him the necessary choice. As sublime as Cabaye can be playing balls over the top and the like, I really think that France need to do as much as they can in that midfield to protect the defense, and there's really only one option there.
Yeah, the amount of options that France have full stop is starting to make my head spin a little bit, especially in that attacking area. And there's a few teams that unfortunately have to take that on this summer, and one of them being Romania on Friday evening. And while many feel that Group A will be an easy ride for the hosts, you can never be so certain. Switzerland and Albania complete the teams that Le Bleu must pass through to get through to the knockout stages. But Jonathan, who do you think will cause France the most trouble out of those three?
Well, I definitely think that Switzerland will be the hardest side to beat, but of course they come third in the list of fixtures. So I think, looking at the opening two games, I'd say that the tougher team is probably Albania. We've seen them in action against France recently. They were in the group that France was sort of, theatrically drawn in, kind of just for show, so that they got some semi-competitive matches under their belt while they were waiting for everyone else to qualify for the tournament. And Albania really looked, very, very impressive, very solid. Nothing spectacular, nothing showy. They were just a very solid, tough to break down team. I think that they could frustrate France once again. This is a team that drew when they played each other in Rennes, but then beat France in Albania. And I think that if France somehow contrive to not win the opening game against Romania and start to look a bit nervy, a bit jittery, going into that game against Albania will be an absolute nightmare, because they'll be up for every match, particularly against the hosts. And if France were to go into, I know a lot has been made of the fact that teams can still advance from the group with 3 draws, but if France are to go into the final game against Switzerland having not picked up favourable results against either Romania or Albania, I think that puts them in a really difficult position, because France really need to win the group if they want to go as deep as possible in the tournament.
Yeah, and thinking about some of the other opponents that they have coming up, Eric, obviously they have Switzerland in that final game, but that could be their toughest fixture, really, especially, like Jonathan says, if they need a result, could be a tricky one to get that win out of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that all of these teams, I think, are of a piece. I think that they're very sound defensively, and they will struggle for goals. Switzerland have Breel Embolo, who I think has had a really fantastic couple of seasons for FC Basel, and Albania has some lovely attacking options as well, particularly with. I'm blanking on his name. The guy who plays in the MLS was at Basel for a while. Gashi, and it's all these teams are just dangerous enough. I think, as Jonathan rightly said, to beat France. If France fail to look cohesive going forward, again they have, but if they're not on their day, like that match at Albania won that match 1-0 on a free kick. that's the type of match that could undo them. I could see, for example, France finishing this group with 5 points, beating Romania and drawing with Switzerland, um, and Albania, say 1-1 in both of those matches, and potentially going through in second, were Switzerland to say capitalize on France's stumbles. So it's a really dangerous group. I think that we have to look at. I know we as pundits and we as commentators tend to mock the Euros going to 24 teams and deride it for the quality of teams that it's brought in. But the fact of the matter is, these teams can't all play on their day a really strong football match. And again, they are going to be G'd up to play the hosts, and they are going to want to show what they can do. I mean, Romania haven't qualified for a major tournament since 2008 Euros, I believe. Albania never have, and it's Switzerland are always a solid team, but they don't really have the focal point in attack that I think necessarily has me worried. But again, they're all teams that on their day can be exceptionally dangerous.
Yeah, and the reason they are dangerous is, like you've mentioned, is that they're all very solid. I mean, especially I've seen Romania play a couple of times during the qualifiers, and they conceded 2 goals in the entire qualifying round, which is pretty ridiculous for any team, even facing the likes of Northern Ireland, Hungary, Finland, Faroe Islands, and Greece won't necessarily put all the frighteners in you, but still, 2 goals conceded is ridiculous. I mean, the Vlad Chichares and Dragos Grigori in the centre-back pairing have really held firm, and with Tataran Sanu and the Fiorentina goalkeeper behind them as well. He's a solid shot stopper, and Razavan Rat in that back end. They've got a really solid defence, and that's going to be a really difficult ask for France, especially if they don't score within those first 30 minutes. The opening game of the tournament they're hosting, the nerves start to set in, the fans start getting on their backs. It can change quite quickly, can't it, Jonathan, really, that these teams that play defensively while France are playing at home, it could really turn into some tough games.
Yeah, of course it can, and I think that every team that plays France, whether they're among the favourites or among some of the minnows of the tournament, their coaches will tell them the same thing. Whatever we do, don't concede an early goal. Switzerland will know better than most what happens if they concede an early goal. We saw that in the 2014 World Cup when France just absolutely ripped them apart. And I think if France can get themselves an early goal, particularly I'm thinking, somebody like Giroud, all of a sudden the confidence is flowing, and then they're going to be a major danger for the remainder of the match. I don't think that teams will want to just write off the game if they concede the first goal to France, but it will be so difficult for those teams to get back into the game once they fall behind, particularly in this group stage. Yeah, you're right. The teams that Romania played in qualifying were not of the highest quality, but still, to come out of the qualification phases, with such a good defensive record, that will be a big boost in confidence for them coming into this tournament. They will just try to do things exactly the same way that they were doing in qualifying, and obviously notice an upturn in the quality that they're facing, but they will still try to keep that organisation, that tightness in defence, and if they can do that, they have a good chance of frustrating France. And like we've said, if the fans start to get a little jittery, a little unnerved, then if Romania can get to half time at 0-0. The second half, it'll be really interesting to see how France handle it, because we've seen them at times in the past in friendly matches, looking a bit lackluster. But once progression to the latter stages as quickly as possible is on the line, we'll need to see a bit more urgency from France.
Yeah, and going back to Albania with you, Eric, in qualifying they played with probably unsurprisingly, they played with about 3 defensive midfielders in most games, and a strong back line that has Loic Sana, the captain from Nantes, who we know very well. But they don't pose too much of a threat. They scored 7 goals in the entire qualifying. That's the least of any qualifier for the European Championships. But if France again don't get that early goal and they allow them to get in, we've seen in the friendlies that they're a good team and they can cause problems, can't they?
Albania, yeah, they don't. It's interesting because they have They have in Kache a player who's a bit more of an attacking option, but this team sort of is a 4-3-3, sort of is a 4-5-1. I think that Legnani, who has generally played it, Emir Legnani, who also plays it not on loan from Rennes, is generally used as a left back, but he plays a little bit further up for Albania, being sort of a de facto wing back, and Gashi again, who is usually was used centrally at Basel, also plays as a sort of de facto wing back. So even their most talented and creative players going forward in wide areas are generally used as sort of de facto wing backs. It's really a when Albania are in defense, it's really a sort of a kick and rush style of play. Without much of a creative player. I mean, Talent Xhaka is a fine player, but he's very much a physically robust performance, and I think his style of play sort of really embodies the overall aesthetic that Albania have. That if Legnani or Gashi can hit you on the break, then there you have. I mean, even the fullbacks. I mean, we're so used to attacking fullbacks in the modern game of football that the likes of Hisaj and Anagoli are definitely not attacking fullbacks. They're more likely to get stuck in and break up play than to play the overlap or hit across. It's a hyper focused defensive aesthetic, and I think that the DiBiase, the manager, has done really well to drill this team to finish ahead of Denmark and Portugal sides Denmark and Serbia sides. They finished behind Portugal. Denmark and Serbia, who are teams that are usually in the upper reaches of qualifying. They've really come from out of nowhere, and they're typically finishing 5th or 6th in their qualifying groups for major tournaments. But DiBiase's gotten some important players to come on board from Switzerland's youth ranks, and I think that's made all the difference to have a really solid and really strong team.
Yeah, and that gifted win against Serbia that they got 3-0 after the abandonment really pushed them over the line a little bit. And while that's obviously a little bit of luck that they needed, they have been impressive in their qualifying campaign and they deserve to be there. Just before you go, Jonathan, we just wanted to get a question we've got from the live stream from Wes Brown. I'm not sure if it's the former Manchester United defender, but he's asking if you think who will start up front for Switzerland during the tournament, whether it will be somewhere Ahmed Mehdi or Brice Mbolo up front for the Swiss.
I have to say, I think that as great a talent as Mbolo is, I'm not sure if we'll see him starting. I mean, there's plenty of good options there for the Swiss. You're looking at the likes of Seferovic, Mehmedi, even someone like Eren Dediok. I mean, looking through their squad, it's funny how many footballers you forget completely exist until you come across somebody like Dediok, who was a well-established name a couple of years ago when he was playing in Germany. He's played for the likes of Leverkusen, Hoffenheim. Now, sort of rebuilding his career in Turkey. Dangerous kind of player to come off the bench. And I think as far as sort of Mbolo goes, I'm expecting to see him perhaps come off the bench as an impact substitute. But that said, by the time it comes to playing Switzerland, both teams are going to be 2 games into their group stage, and I think both coaches could be changing their plans at that point. We'll see how Switzerland have fared in their opening 2 games, and who Petkovic lines up in attack against France then. But I certainly think to start off with, Petkovic is probably going to want to go with someone with a little bit more experience than Mbolo. But as we know, Mbolo is a fantastic talent. He's proven himself to be to have quite prolific potential at club level. He's scored broken into double figures in both of the last 2 seasons for Basel. Sounds like he's on the verge of making a big move to Germany. I think the last I saw, I think he was linked with a move to Leipzig. So it's a big opportunity for him to impress, and I certainly think that if he started or played on the bench, I expect him to pose problems. He's definitely a player that France are going to have to watch out for come that meeting in Lille. But you look at that Swiss front line. And there are players with good aerial ability who could perhaps exploit France's weakness from set pieces. I think this is something that also that concerns me coming into the tournament, because I think it was after the Russia game, the 4-2 win in the friendly. I think I saw a stat tweeted out by Optajean that 49% of the goals that France have conceded under Deschamps have come from set pieces. And they've only conceded 2 more goals since then, which came against Cameroon. Neither of those came from set pieces, but that weakness does still exist. And I think any teams with tall physical players capable of winning the ball in the air will pose a danger to France in this tournament. I definitely think the Swiss are, in that bracket.
Yeah, and I've just thinking that when you mentioned Eric Dirdiak, I think many people forgot him when he was at Hoffenheim and Leverkusen for the second time. But what will happen is he'll prove me wrong come the tournament anyway. But thank you, Jonathan, for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure having you on as always. Follow him at John_LeGossip on Twitter. He's always an excellent read. Thank you very much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me on, and I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, speak to you soon. Right, so very quickly, Eric, would you pick Mbolo or would it be a Mehdi for you up front for Swiss?
I think I understand where Jonathan's coming from in terms of Swiss. This is a very veteran Switzerland team, other than Mbolo by and large. But I really think that his ability on the ball. He really can be the outlet and the spark that allows Switzerland to do what they need to do in terms of attack. I think that it's his time to shine. I think that he's one of the players who could, really boost their status in this tournament. If there's a solid defensive framework around him, there's no reason he shouldn't be given the opportunity, even given Derdiak's veteran status within the team.
Yeah, what a perfect segue, if I do say so myself, for surprise packages. But I will mention very quickly that I think I would go with Breel Mbolo myself as well. I always think you should trust in the young players, and a Swiss side that's struggled for goals in the past, give them a chance. Now, with every major tournament that comes around, there are bound to be a few surprises from teams that are bound together to individuals that shine on the big stage. It's more than likely that in this crazy game, another great story will don our screens over the next month. So, Eric, who or what team do you think can make this tournament their Hollywood blockbuster?
Austria. I think unquestionably they have a group that Portugal we know are notoriously uneven and have been for years, basically for Cristiano Ronaldo's career. Iceland, again, are a great story. I don't think anybody expects much out of them at this tournament. Hungary are, a team that scraped in, without having really impressed that much in qualification. But I think that if you look at the level of talent on show, Marko Arnautovic, David Alaba, Zlatko Junusovic hasn't had the season he had last season. But I think that this Austria team is incredibly dangerous, and I think really could win that group, and with the right draw, I think could be a surprise semifinalist.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point that people are making that Austria are a potential dark horse, and while I agree that they have some interesting players, especially in that midfield of David Alaba, Junusovic, who's had a solid season with Werder Bremen, even though they've struggled, and Julian Baumgartlinger, I'll say it right, Baumgartlinger, who's been at Mainz this season and is obviously, I believe, going to Schalke in the summer. He's had a very, very good season in that midfield that helped them get into the Europa League. But the two questions I would ask is do they have enough in defence? Although Alexander Dragovic has been impressive, and do they have enough up front? I mean, they're going probably with Mark Janko up front, or they're going to go with Lucas Hinterseer, who scored most of his goals at Ingolstadt from the penalty spot. Do they have enough?
A surprise semi-finalist. I think that Janko again doesn't have the strongest record international level, but we've seen. I mean, Arnautovic isn't an out-and-out striker for Stoke, yet he still manages to score. I think Martin Harnik, I think, is dangerous as well, and we've seen Junusovic's ability from set pieces as well. I think that there is the potential to be really dangerous for this team. To be really dangerous going forward, and I think that defensively, Martin Hinteregger and Alexander Dragovic are fantastic players. We've seen or fans of the Premier League have seen Christian Fuchs. He's still as reliable as he has been during his time at Schalke for Leicester, and this is just a really strong team, top to bottom. And I think that given a group without a real heavyweight in it, I think that Austria still have the potential to make a lot of noise. Goalkeeper, I do have a little bit of worries there about Robert Almer. I think that that's a bit of a question mark, but other than that, I think that Austria are in very good nick and have a lot of potential to surprise people.
Well, it's certainly a club that most people will be watching, and I'm sure a few might have a sneaky bet on them. I bet they're sure outsiders. But another person joining us now this evening is our editor-in-chief, Christian Uri. Thank you, Christian, for joining us.
Good evening, Nathan. How are we doing?
I'm very well, thank you. We're just talking about potential surprises in the European Championships. Have you got a player or a team in mind that might cause a few upsets or raise their profile?
Well, I quite fancy Portugal, and I think, apart from a fairly very, very good Euros, of course, at the beginning of the 21st century, they've sort of disappointed at major tournaments. And I just feel like in all parts of the pitch now, Portugal have got some really good young talents who really have nothing to fear going into this tournament. That sort of attitude when you know you've got maybe 2 or 3 more major tournaments to fight for in your career. The likes of Rafael Guerreiro, who we, of course, know very well from Lorient. Then, of course, Anthony Lopez in goal, who seems to be finally challenging for that #1 space from Rui Patricio, which is obviously good to see. Certainly well-deserved after his showing for Lyon this season. I also quite fancy Poland in Germany's group, Germany and Ukraine, of course, and then Northern Ireland making up that group. I think, again, they've been slightly undersold in the sort of previous for Euro 2016. We can run through the players, but there is enough quality everywhere in every sector for that team in order for them to have a great tournament. Of course, Krychowiak's going to be extremely important for them if they are to progress. And I think, Nathan, you predicted that Kemal Grosicki was about to light France on fire this summer. I'm not sure if you saw a picture of him he posted on Twitter earlier today, looking very questionable, to put it lightly, but he's always a character, and I think he will enjoy playing up front with Lewandowski, or if he plays on the wing, then providing the big Bayern Munich man with all those chances to score some great goals.
Well, that's the team, ironically, that I was going to mention as my potential pick for someone who might cause an upset in Poland. And looking at some of the players they've got, I mean, you've mentioned Krychowiak already and Grosicki and obviously Lewandowski, but if Grosicki does play on that wing and Błaszczykowski on the other wing, they have a real treat of Lewandowski and possibly Alexander Milik, Arkadiusz Milik, who's been at Ajax this season, scored 21 goals in the Eredivisie, and 2 big centre forwards that like to score goals. That's exactly what we used to see, and that's the kind of team that you're going to get with those 2 flying wingers. Krychowiak as that holding player, and Zielinski, who of Empoli, who's been very, very good this season, who's playing as that box-to-box midfielder. They really have a good section for that 6 in front of them. They do have maybe some worries for who plays next to Kamil Glik in the back, and they don't really have an established left-back. Piszczek, obviously, playing right-back is good for them, but they're a really interesting team in a relatively weak group. Germany will probably be at least the favourites. They've not had the best of preparations, really, but they're still a very strong side, and you can never, ever rule the Germans out. But the Ukraine are getting a little bit old in areas. They don't have the same players, and Northern Ireland, unfortunately, will probably look like they're going to make up the numbers, but they're going to be a very dangerous team, I think, especially if they go through Poland. No one wants to face Lewandowski, that's for certain, in the form that he's shown this season again. But, Eric, is there anyone that you're looking at in particular, player-wise, that could shine during this Euros and up their stocks ahead of a transfer window afterwards?
Well, I think that there are a couple players from the Turkish team that I think can be really dangerous. I know that Turkey didn't have the greatest the greatest match against England, but there besides the names that we know like Sahin Çalhanoğlu and Arda Turan, there are a couple younger players, Oguzhan Ozakup for Besiktas, and I think is a really interesting young player, and I think that that he's the type of player who I think can really make a big difference. This is, for a change, a Turkey squad that's largely based in Turkey, and they're starting to. This team is a team that's starting to sort of call on some younger players and move the team forward a little bit. And I think that the likes of Umut Bulut and Mevlut Erding, who have been important to the team in the recent past, are being left out for what's a fairly young team, with the exception of Inan and Tehran. And I think that they're sort of a team that's got a lot of question marks because, let's face it, I mean, unless we're seeing Galatasaray or Besiktas, in European competition, or Fenerbahce when they're not banned, these are players who we're not seeing a whole lot of. But because of that, I think Turkey as a team and Ozyakup in general have a real chance to surprise people.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting team altogether, Turkey, mentioning them. I did go to the game against England, and they did impress in moments. Gökhan Gunal had a very good game, although he's unlikely to start. And you've mentioned some really good players, and there's players that might not even see the field that are very good. Emre Mor's just got his move to Borussia Dortmund earlier today, and Yunus Mali was excellent, especially in the first half of the season for Mainz, and was linked himself with a move to Dortmund, but we'll see how good they can be. Christian, is there anyone that springs to mind for you that can really light up the Euros?
Well, I think an individual who's not talked about at all, perhaps at least in sort of, whether it's England or France or wherever you are, sort of in Western Europe, is Vladimir Darida, of Hertha Berlin. He's going to be really important for the Czech Republic if they are to make anything of their chances in this tournament. Of course, Thomas Rosicky, having been out with injury for the entire season with Arsenal, comes in as the captain and sort of waltzes his way into the team. But the real individual in that central midfield that is going to be key is going to be the Darida of Hertha Berlin. And I think if he can provide the engine, he can provide that midfield stability and that bridge between defense and attack. Then with a sort of goalkeeper like Petr Cech, Czech Republic can maybe do something that people really don't at the moment fancy, because I think the squad overall is extremely old. I think for example, a team like Wales with a very difficult group, they're going to need to rely very much on Ashley Williams. It's going to be a very important role that Williams plays, because one, he's going to have to lead the team, but two, defensive stability for Wales when the outballs to Ramsey and whether it's Robson Kanu or Bale, if they aren't working and Wales are just going to have to tuck in and sit down, that's the situation for them. I think if you look from a France perspective, an individual who is interesting for Les Bleus to look at is Olivier Giroud, because I think if he can really prove himself this tournament, become maybe the top scorer, at least for France, and be a reliable goal threat throughout the tournament, then perhaps Giroud can finally put some of the critics to bed. If France can really go and do something magical this tournament, then Giroud is going to have to be at least important, if not central, to that success.
Yeah, some terrific choices there. I especially like Vladimir Darida. He's a really terrific centre midfielder. The few that I'm going to pick are a little bit different, of different scales as well. There's a player for Iceland, Johan Berg Gudmundsson, who's currently at Charlton. He'll definitely be looking for a move away. That's a minimum of saying with the struggles that the London club are having at the moment. But from what I've seen of him in the Championship this season and the seasons previous, he's a really solid player, and he's been quite impressive for Iceland as well, and quite important to their hopes. And I think that in a relatively simple group like we've mentioned, yes, Austria look interesting and Portugal are a very good side, but that's still quite a reasonably competitive group. They would fancy themselves against Hungary, and I think that he can certainly up his stock a little bit. Another player, ironically, from the same group is Danilo Pereira of Portugal, who's the defensive midfielder. He was, I thought, exceptional against England in the friendly. I thought he was the best player on the park. He really broke up play very well. Was absolutely stern, especially when they went down to 10 men. He sort of shifted a little bit further back, but not quite into defence, and helped protect his team. I thought he was excellent. And other than that, possibly lucky goal for England right near the end, where eventually the pressure told, then it would have been an excellent performance. But he's certainly someone that clubs should be watching for in the summer, because I think he could be a really, really good buy come that point. But it would be difficult to get him out of that contract in Porto. That would be for certain. But I think we should move on to our final topic this evening, and it's the one that usually is done before big tournaments, and that's time for predictions. So I'm going to go for the Golden Boot winner first. Go to you, Eric. Who do you have for leading the scoring charts at the Euros?
Thomas Muller. He's, despite his in and out at times for Bayern Munich this year, he always seems to come good in tournaments. Starting with the 2010 World Cup. So I think that I look for Germany to be at least a semi-finalist, to give Muller ample opportunity to score.
Christian, who do you have as your top goal scorer for the tournament?
Well, I'm going to go with someone that's perhaps slightly left of field, and I can't quite decide whether or not this is definitely not wise, but I can't decide if it's really not wise or really really not wise. But it's going to depend a bit on how selfish Cristiano Ronaldo is. But I think someone like Eder up front for Portugal, if things start to go right for Portugal, you mentioned Nathan just a little bit earlier how impressive some of these young Portuguese players are as well. Pereira we talked about, but all over the pitch. And I think if Eder can get good service from Ronaldo, whether it's Quaresma or whoever is going to be on those wings, and whether or not Ronaldo plays up front instead of Eder, we still don't necessarily know at the moment. Of course, Ronaldo's only just recently come back from an extended holiday after the Champions League final against Atletico Madrid. But I quite like Eder. I think in their group and in terms of his form, I think he can get a lot of goals in the group stage. So yeah, I'm going to not be typical and go for something which is slightly unrealistic. But hey.
I'm trying to imagine Cristiano Ronaldo supplying all the assists to Eder, but it might be a fantasy world for you slightly, Christian, that one. But I think you've stolen my choice, Eric, of Thomas Muller, so I will go for someone else. Although the man who makes football look incredibly hard by being but still a world-class player is a big fan of mine, and I think he will get it. But I think I've mentioned Poland already, and Lewandowski's in the form of his life again. He's really been terrific this season for Bayern Munich and a real catalyst for them. A team that many people thought didn't really need a big burly centre forward has that big burly centre forward, and they don't want to get rid of him now. He's been exceptional. He'll be the leading line for Poland, and especially if they get out of their group and get a couple of extra games, he's going to be their main man, and he's going to notch plenty of goals for them. Now for the best player of the tournament, so the one who will win a golden ball. This one obviously can be a slightly controversial choice because it might come out of left field, or it might be someone like it was in the World Cup where they just gave it to Messi because he's Messi. But who do you have, Eric?
I think that the form that Kevin De Bruyne's shown over the last 2 years, I think that if Belgium are going to have any success in this tournament, it's down to him. And all the talk that we've talked about this Belgian team as being this golden generation with Witsel and Moussa Dembele and Brighton Nangolan, all of these fantastic players. I mean, De Bruyne is and we've seen, particularly with Manchester City and Wolfsburg, how poorly each of those two club teams has performed without him. That I think De Bruyne has a real chance to burnish his star even further and take Belgium into the semi-finals.
Christian, who do you think will win the best player?
I think Dimitri Payet is in the form of his life. I think his entire career has been building up to this season, and I think his entire career is also, and this season rather, has been building up right up until this tournament. I think he's going to be continuously decisive. I think he's going to be consistently brilliant, and I think he's going to be a very important part if France can go and win this thing.
I'm also going to go with the Frenchman, but as many stories, a great one in 442 magazine this month has mentioned that France have had a midfield maestro that has played for Juventus at the time of winning a tournament that has led them to glory, and unsurprisingly, Paul Pogba, it's his time to shine, much like Zinedine Zidane and Michel Platini in the past. He's a terrific footballer. There's no bias because he used to play for Manchester United, but he is really an absolutely exceptional footballer, and he's just on the cusp of being the ultra world-class player that really becomes the best in the world. He's one of the best midfielders. I think this tournament is his time to prove that he is the best midfielder in Europe and in the world. And this is exactly the stage that he'll want to do it on. So I'm going to go for Paul Pogba on that one.
You see, Nathan, I just completely disagree with that. If you look at the 2 or 3 most recent French friendlies, We've seen the Paul Pogba that we've seen pretty much all season, who will pull something fantastic off, but then lose the ball the next 4 times unnecessarily, attempting to do something that, is basically unnecessary as France attempt to build play. Now, that's obviously great to watch, but I just don't see him being as mature as you want him to be. I just don't see it. But, we will see.
Yeah, if I were to have to go for a French player, it'd have to be Griezmann. I think that this player is continually underrated. For me, he's one of the top 5 footballers in the world. And I think that if any French player were to step up and do it, it's going to be him. I think that the form he's shown for Atletico, even dating back to his time at Real Sociedad, he's not been played in systems that necessarily allow him to rack up the goals and numbers that the likes of a Messi or Ronaldo do. But the fact is, he's consistently done it. Got it done for his club team for quite a long time now, and I think that he's been a little bit in the shade in the international scene, even though he was a starter at the last World Cup. I think that it's the opportunity is there for him to step up and be one of the top players in the world, to show people that he is one of the top players in the world, because I think that he is. But I just think that for where Atletico sit in La Liga and for where I think that he's the type of player that can really have a breakout tournament and show it. If anyone's going to win the award for France, it'll be Griezmann for me.
But yeah. I think it's interesting with Griezmann because he's been a player who hasn't necessarily had a lot of pressure on him up until this season, when he was really relied on by Simeone to be the forefront of that attack. And this penalty miss in the Champions League final, of course, is his biggest failure so far in his career. So it's going to be very interesting to see if he can bounce back from that or not. I think that's the only thing that slightly weighs on my mind when we think about Griezmann.
Yeah, I agree with you, Eric. I think Griezmann's within the top footballers in the world at the moment. He's sensational, but I'm confidently disagreeing with both of you. The story's clearly written for Pogba to do this and create another Hollywood moment for France as they win the tournament on his shoulders. But I'm going to add another topic into this, and that's going to be a disappointment of the tournament. I'll open this to be a team or a player, if you like. Eric, who do you think will disappoint come the Euros?
It's too easy to say England, isn't it?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I just think that Hodgson is being so obstinate with his tactics. I mean, he has the players, if he drops Rooney, to have one of the most exciting midfields in the tournament, and with the attacking prowess of Kane and Vardy, who've gotten it done, over a season consistently, and aren't playing with the weight of failure that the likes of Rooney have had, or weight of disappointment, I should say, that having disappointed a succession of major tournaments that some of the players of the past have had. They don't have the weight of that golden generation tag. I mean, they're players who have come, risen from relative obscurity, if you date looking back 2 years ago, to become some of the best attackers in the world. And it's similar with the midfield, the likes of Ali and Dyer, as well as the fullbacks, Rose and Walker. This is a team England is turning over a new leaf. But if Hodgson persists in starting Rooney and trying to shoehorn Vardy and Kane onto the wings and limit their effectiveness, he's wasting, probably England's best chance to to impress at a major tournament that they're going to have for the foreseeable future. Vardy is fantastic, but he's 29 this year or 30. He's not a young. Yeah, he's not a young player. So, if Hodgson can remove his head from his posterior, then England can succeed. But for the time being, I don't see it.
I am going to partially agree and partially disagree with you. What I will very quickly say is I think Rooney's still important to the team. The formation that he wants to play is wrong because he wants to play 4-3-3 really, but he's trying to shoehorn in a 4-1-2-1-2, which he should play because we have the players to play that with Eric Dyer at the base, Dele Alli, and then one of Jack Wilshere or Jordan Henderson. I personally prefer Jordan Henderson because he's better box to box. Then Rooney in behind Vardy and Kane. The issue is, like in that Portugal game, Vardy and Kane should not be trapping him back wing backs and doubling up and leaving Rooney on his own to try and find passes to no one in front of him. It should be the midfielders that drop out. He drops back into that role in midfield to defend them and allow Vardy and Kane, or at least one of them, to be at the top to spread these counter-attacks to. But I am worried that we're going to be too defensive. But before I complain too much about England's tactics going in head, Christian, who do you think will disappoint?
Well, I have to concur with parts of what both of you said on England. I think that actually, of all the managers and all the teams to use these friendlies to their advantage, I think Hodgson's completely missed the point. I think there's still a huge question mark on if Vardy and Kane can even come up with a decent partnership together. I mean, these are two individuals who were not exactly private about their slight dislike for each other throughout the Premier League season. I think I agree with Eric. I think it's almost slightly ironic, this whole new England wave of players, and then you insist on playing Wayne Rooney or implementing Wayne Rooney in this system, which, again, when's he ever impressed at a major tournament? I don't think there is an answer to that question. But right, maybe. But in terms of a team that I think is sadly going to disappoint, and I say this with a heavy heart, I think it's all set up for Zlatan Ibrahimovic's final few days in France to really fall flat. I think their group is extremely difficult with Belgium and Italy. I think Belgium now have quite a defensive crisis, but I still think that Wilmots is a fantastic national team coach, and I think he's going to be able to overcome those issues. I just think, this is potentially Zlatan Ibrahimovic's final major tournament, although he did say in an interview with Le Monde today that he wants to play at Qatar 2022. Which he would be 40 at that time, but anyway, he does what he wants. But I just think, especially with the managerial situation, it's been very difficult for Amren to keep his job throughout these qualifiers in the first place. I just think the whole thing is really doomed to fail for Sweden, and it's a shame because I'd like to see Zlatan grace France's pitches one more time in a fantastic way, in a victorious way, but I just don't see it happening.
I think I'm going to go for another team in that group you briefly mentioned, and it's quite an easy one, really, in Italy. They have no forwards, is the easiest way to put it. Eder has been relatively disappointing for Inter since he joined from Sampdoria. Graziano Pella's had an okay end to the season, but is not prolific up at this level. Ciro Immobile's not played enough football, neither has Simeone Zaza, or been consistent enough for their teams. And the real hammer blows is the loss of Claudio Marchisio, and especially our Marco Verratti of PSG, who's a really sensational footballer, would have been the massive X factor for Italy. While they still have a really good defence with Barzagli, Bonucci, Chiellini and Buffon in goal, they just won't be able to score with the quality they have on the field. And I can see them. I wouldn't be entirely surprised, but that if they've lost their two initial games against Belgium and Sweden, I could even imagine Ireland getting 3 points over Italy if they're not careful. I know that might be a bold claim because I don't think Republic of Ireland have the best of teams going in. But we'll finish with the big question: who will lift the Henri Delaunay Trophy come July 10th? Eric.
Germany. I think that the likes of Kimmich and Jonas Hector have come into this team and further bolstered the incredible depth that Germany have and the attacking options that they have. But the team's just in form. I mean, I think you can make a good argument for Jerome Boateng being the best center back in the world. Manuel Neuer is the best goalkeeper in the world. I think there's just too many weapons and too much depth on this German team for them not to pull off the same double that France and Spain have pulled off in recent years of going World Cup, Euros in succession.
Christian, who do you have?
I have to sadly agree with Eric. I'd love to say that I probably think that France are going to lift the trophy again on home soil, but the Germans just have this ability to prepare in a completely next level way for the tournament. Löw and his staff have this down. They've had it down ever since, basically 2002, and finally they were able to reap the rewards from that. That's the World Cup in 2014, but I think, pretty much all of Eric's points stand with me. I think a lot is actually going to depend on how the French public react and how much they can support this French team. I still think that actually, in terms of cohesion and in terms of football that they play, the French attack or the French front four is still possibly the best in the tournament. Sadly, I think that potentially the defence is going to let them down, because not only is it not the preferred centre-back partnership of Varane and Koscielny, but also I have my doubts defensively about Evra in a big game, and Sanya too has been impressive this season for Manchester City in the main, but I'm still not particularly convinced by that. So I think France will fall short, and I also have to go with Germany.
Well, I'm going to go against the grain. I would have thought Germany, but I am going to go with France for the tournament. I think even though the defensive frailties are a real issue, the real positive for France in this tournament is not only that if they finish first, their route is very simple until the sort of semi-final stage, but also the real factor in this tournament is and it's quite clear when you look at a number of teams, is that they don't have an enormous amount of attacking talent, and therefore, as long as you can be okay defensively, you can be sound. And by far, I think France have the most options in attack to vary it up and have dangerous players in all those attacking positions. I think that will be enough to give France the win, because this is going to be a strange tournament full of solid defences and not so great attacks in a lot of teams. And I think that the teams like Germany, I think teams like France, who are just about good enough in those areas, will just about sneak through. But I am going with France, so let's hope they can do the business. But that's all for this week. My thanks to Jonathan earlier, and my thanks to Christian and Eric for joining us. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. And in a closing message to all the teams before the championships start on Friday, in the immortal words of Muhammad Ali, he who is not courageous enough to take risks will accomplish nothing in life. A bientôt and farewell.